So, all right, we're in the recording, so I guess I should probably talk like there's an audience because there will be. So, yes, first of all, hello to you in the future watching the recording, and hello to any of you in the present who are lurking in the chat. If you want to make a tired publisher feel good, please make any loud noise you want. Hello, Mike. There you go. Just like Mike did right there. Please make a loud noise in the chat so we know you're all there. That'd be great. We're doing the classic first 5-10 minutes thing of like letting people get into the lobby, get the popcorn, get that sorted out, coat check. So before we begin, but I will say and probably reiterate in a few minutes that what we're doing tonight is a double-edged short story panel discussion, something that we in the sort of Brackenbury Books New Edge Sword and Sorcery community like to do. We do it approximately every month, and for a long time we've mostly spoken about contemporary stories, as we will be doing tonight. But just last month we started doing a kind of alternating thing between contemporary stories and classic stories. So it's just a fun thing. If you end up getting into our books and following us on socials, that kind of thing, join the Discord, which is a thing we extend to everybody whenever we wrap a crowdfund. Yeah, it's just a fun way to kind of like learn about new stories or new stories from like the last few years, right? In the contemporary one, or get to discuss, say, a classic Conan story with some new people via chat and panel. Yeah. So it's a good old merry time. And so logically, I mean, tonight, you can probably guess if you haven't looked already, we're going to be talking about the authors of our two novellas bound together in Double-Edged Sword and Sorcery, Dariel R.A. Quiogue and Bryn Hammond. In particular, we are talking about stories from each of them that were published in a certain magazine that we do, New Edge Sword and Sorcery. There's my out-of-print hardcover. Sorry to brag. There we go. And there's the soft covers. Kirk, nice, man. And so, yeah, we'll be looking at a story from number 1, which I'll show the art for funsies there, Sister Chaos by Bryn Hammond. That's the goatskin story. And we will be looking at the cover story, actually, as it turned out. Issue 2, you can see there's Orhan and a certain demon we'll be discussing. And as it happens, that is the very first story in the issue, The Demon of Tashi Zhang. So, a little bit of art there by Carlos Castillo. Oh, pardon me, Aldo Ojeda. And the art was by Dan Rempel in issue 1 there. Pardon me. So, as you can imagine, in order to discuss these stories in any substance, it will be spoiler city. If you're okay with that, keep watching. If you're not okay with that, run to your nearest newedgeswordandsorcery.com and buy the issues and read them and then come back. It is also an option to get them as an add-on in this campaign. So if you decide you want to pledge or you already have and you think, I can wait till I get my book to get the issues, by all means, go ahead with the add-on. You can even add on issues 3 and 4, which will be released later this year, timed as such so that we'll have them ready to go by the time we release the book early next year. So have no fear about that. Hello, James. All right, there we go. Another person in the chat. Good to see you. Good to see you. So I'm having a little beer for my nerves here because as a publisher, until you comfortably are well past 100% funded, you just can't help it. But I gotta say, I am feeling pretty good. We just cracked 85% today, which feels nice. And we still got a little over 2 weeks to go. We also cracked 250 backers. We actually got our 255th just as we started the recording, which means only people who back the crowdfund, this is exclusive, will get a bonus bonus Orhan the Snow Leopard story. It's 7,000 words, a meaty little fella that is not necessary to understand the novella. We would never do that. That's kind of gross. But it is like a little fun side dish to the novella. It will add a little bit of depth and perspective to some of the stuff going on in that. So yeah, fun bonus material, right? And so that's achieved, hurrah. And with slightly over 2 weeks to go, I feel like it's plausible we could hit the next one, which is 300 backers, unlocks a whole bunch of gorgeous poetry by Bryn Hammond, which ties into her world and setting with Goatskin on her novella. So pretty cool, I would say. But maybe I'm biased, who knows? Anyway, all right, so that's enough preamble. I could go on forever, as we all know. But it's only been a few minutes, so what I'm going to do before we get into the story proper is I'm going to introduce our marvelous panel. If you've watched any of our panels in the past, you're probably familiar with these folks. They're smart and tricky and good and all those things. I'm going to start with Jay Wolf. Who are you?
Hi, I'm Jay Wolf, author, illustrator, and editor, and podcasting bon vivant. I am editing a little anthology for the very same publisher, Brackenbury Books, Beating Hearts and Battle Axes, a romantic sword and sorcery anthology.
That sounds really good. Trying to put my Casey Kasem promo voice on there. Kevin Beckett. Who the heck are you, buddy?
Well, my name's Kevin Beckett. Every month I do a monthly newsletter of new and notable sword and sorcery, rounding up all the good things that are happening in the community and the way it interfaces with popular culture. Maybe I'll chronicle as it takes over the culture, or maybe it'll just be a little blip. But I do it every month, and people seem to like it.
People are really liking it. I mean, your sub numbers have been going up, and I see people complimenting it. And honestly, folks, like big heart, double plus one, both thumbs up kind of thing for Just the Axeman. It is a really great source of news on the scene. And I mean, like I'm a publisher of the stuff, and Kevin makes me aware of things I've never heard of. So he's good at it, man. Meanwhile, we round out the panel with Kirk Johnson. Who are you?
Hey, good evening, all. My name is Kirk Johnson, author, Brooklyn recluse, and unapologetic smoker. So, and I write sword and sorcery, sword and soul, and some a little bit of horror there and there. And I'm excited to be here.
And you know what? I'll say it so Kirk doesn't have to not be classy. I'll be classy. And I'll say you'll also find Kirk in Newest Sword and Sorcery #1 with his story. Let's get the title in there, Carnivora, which is the first in the issue and contains absolutely elements of sword and soul and horror. I'll say no more lest I spoil anything. But tonight, as I say, we are discussing 2 other stories. And you know what? It's a real coin toss. I'm not sure which one to start with. But I would say... All right, let's go with The Demon of Tashizang by Dariel R.A. Quiogue. So tonight, like I obviously edited these stories for the magazine. I've seen them in many versions, many times, and I still love them. It's actually a great pleasure to pull this magazine off the shelf as like a fun object instead of like work, which it was for like a good 12 months, and reread them. But my perspective is always going to be a little mashed up and skewed as a result of how I took these stories in, whereas you 3 got to read them as readers. So I'm going to try and focus a little bit on what you all have to say and be more of a moderator for this chat. But, of course, I'll share some thoughts because I got a big mouth. So let's start with not me. And let's just do general first impressions or first re-impressions, coming back to these stories perhaps after almost a year after their release. Kirk, how did you feel reading The Demon of Tashizang? What's your sort of thing?
So I was aware of Dariel with Four Winds, with his Swords of the Four Winds, and the Snow Leopard character, and I always thought it was like, oh, this is like an awesome movie. So I read it kind of thinking it as a movie in my head. So like the cast of characters, I was thinking like Victor Wong as Tenzin. And from Big Trouble in Little China, I was thinking of him, and I was thinking of, I don't know why his faces kept coming up as our main character, Snow Leopard, Jason Momoa.
Oh, okay.
So
I can see it.
So as soon as it starts, I'm seeing like the vistas of the mountains in the background, and the traveling pilgrims, and this amazing shot of the cavalry coming in to question them about if they've seen this man, and it was in Basil Pandorius, I think his name is playing in the background with Conan theme songs playing in the background. And and it was incredible. It was very epic for me. It was
See, now you've got me thinking maybe lower budget. I'm thinking like Golden Harvest logo comes up before it starts.
Yeah,
dubbing maybe.
I mean,
but
I was thinking of like the early like Chinese set piece dramas that they had, like the Emperor and the Assassin. I was thinking of whoever shot that, and those kind of things, and it was a really exciting kind of
I can see it. You're not the only one who sees
the adventure was there.
Right.
I mean, he really played a lot with the atmosphere and being up in the mountains, and this travel situation that isn't long. It gets to a point like it's a better read than The Hobbit. I'll say that in terms of just traveling,
bold,
or Lord of the Rings. I'll say it. It's the constant walking. You kind of like, okay, this happens, and it's 2 different things. One's a short story, one's a novel, and I got to concede to that. That's for real. But I really enjoyed it, and the fight and the demon at the end, with that little discovery of how to extinguish this demon was great. was great.
Yeah, no, we'll get more into that. And it's funny, actually, you mentioned all the cinematic stuff because that definitely is something that enters Dariel's thinking. He's mentioned
Mhm.
before that the sort of he's more than that, but I'll just for shorthand say the love interest in the walls of Shira Yulun. He just kept imagining Michelle Yeoh, and as soon as he started imagining her, this character got way more proactive.
Right,
Because
right.
he was like, "Oh, Michelle Yeoh wouldn't just
Right.
sit around," kind of thing. So
Right.
that was pretty
Right.
cool.
Real quick, for Sister Chaos, it was Joan
Hmm.
Chen.
Oh
Sister
yes,
Chaos.
Oh, okay.
yes.
Okay.
Oh
Yeah.
my
I
god.
see it.
You know what I mean?
Oh my god.
With her spear and everything, that was all Joan
Yeah,
Chen.
I mean
and
she's great at any
I'll
age,
just
but
say
like
that.
late '80s classic Joan Chen would be.
Oh,
Oh my
yes, yes, with
Yeah,
the blood of
yeah.
heroes. Yes, yeah, that's it.
Oh my
let
god.
me stop.
Yeah. No, it's all good. It's all good. Kevin, I can't remember. I don't think I showed you any drafts when you were still working for the magazine and we developed it. So was your first time reading it when you got your issues?
Yes, it was.
Okay, so
And
it's probably been about a year, right?
yeah, and I can confirm, I don't know what it is. It's just because we all grew up with the soundtrack, but I was hearing drums and I was hearing horn, big brass while like you're reading it. And like myself, very much, Dariel really channels, and I don't know if it's just because that's what I'm most familiar with, but that late 80s, early 90s Hong Kong revival of the 70 Shaw Brothers and of just having that high energy, just get to it, don't screw around, get to it. And
Yeah.
it just had this wonderful air of exoticism. And at the same time, you can see a straight line all the way back to 30s Weird Tales, like Howard's approach to the sword and sorcery, because like every sword and sorcery author goes, oh yeah, I owe something to Robert E. Howard and all of this, but I can really see the Howard, I can really see the Burroughs.
Yep.
Dariel has figured out how to crack that code and make it work for his own stories.
Yeah, right. Like it's absolutely his own voice, but you can see the influence, and it's pleasing for sure. He keeps it moving. Yeah. Sorry, was there anything you want to say before I move on to Jay?
No.
All right. So Jay, well, how was your? Now, I just never call you back the magazine, so I'm guessing your first read was like a while ago. But how was it to revisit?
Oh, it was really nice to revisit it actually because I had read it, of course, and absorbed it. I experienced reading in a similar cinematic fashion, but mine is a little bit more animated because I'm an illustrator. So I have a tendency to think in line and color a little bit more than I do in like cinematic action. And so for me, I was seeing a lot of thinking of Chinese classical painting style. It's very stark inks and stuff of mountains and stuff like that. It's a very he is so evocative in his choices of words and stuff. It was kind of incredible. And coming back to it, one of the things that I noticed was just that and I think both of them have mentioned it also, so I don't want to linger on it too long. But the line of action through the story is just so direct and like very clear, and yet it's layered at the same time. Like there are elements that you're learning about on the first page that are dealt with on the final page, and I just really thought that was very cleverly done.
Yes, absolutely. And it's fun to hear you mention like sort of classical period art, because that was definitely in the reference folder that I sent to Art Yum, who did the cover for The Walls of Shira Yulun, right? We were kind of trying to go for like a period kind of piece, like art, more abstract kind of design for that. So yeah, it's fun that popped into your head while reading this as well.
Yes.
And yeah, actually, full disclosure, folks, I was saying to these three before we started, I said, I love this story so much, and I do have thoughts on it to discuss, but oddly, my notes for it are much slimmer than for Bryn's story, and that is because Dariel makes something that is just like a tightly assembled, perfect little race car. It gets you where you're going and fast and well, and there's no like air gaps between
there
the
is
components.
not a single extraneous detail.
Yeah, and it works. Like I get to the end and I just kind of feel like, whoa, like I just got out of a car that raced around, lightning fast on a ring or whatever. And yeah, like there's no fat. He uses all the bits and pieces that he lays out there, and yet he consistently makes you feel kind of like, oh, I didn't see that coming, but it makes sense.
Yeah.
Right. Which is the thing. I think a surprise that makes perfect sense. It could only have happened this way, and yet somehow it caught you off guard. That's a real feat of writing. And generally speaking, yeah, when I recommend Daryl's writing to people, I say like it's a well-oiled machine, and if you like action and plot that moves quickly, also if you like characters that get problems on problems on problems, right? Like at what point in the story were things easy for for Orhan.
At no time.
Yeah.
Right.
So before I throw it back to y'all, I'm going to mention one thing. Kevin, you mentioned Howard, and one thing that felt very Robert E. Howard to me was actually in the opening where we have some beautiful lines. I enjoyed the blue scene only, where a lowlander starts to lose his breath. Beautiful way of phrasing that. But also just things like the fact that, to me it was a very, other people have done this, of course, but it felt like a very Robert E. Howard move where we are introducing our protagonist through anything but dialogue from our protagonist. We get physical things like the lip snarl when he, he's noticing like the not Chinese, the Wulangian soldiers arriving, and then hearing somebody else be like, the snow leopard here, for me, it's that kind of thing of like building the legend
That
of the
felt
main
very
character.
classic, yes.
Yeah, building the legend of the main character through other characters' dialogue. I love that. It's just a hoot. It elevates them so that by the time they do speak or act in a significant fashion, it just hits so much harder. I think of my favorite Conan story, People of the Black Circle. Conan doesn't even show up for several pages, but before he does, you have a bunch of people being like, "Have you heard of this guy?" So I think it's just, it's a favorite move of mine. What was something else sort of specific to the story, Kirk, perhaps that stood out to you? You mentioned you really enjoyed the action at the end with the demon there.
His conversations with Tenzin.
Yeah.
There's those little bits of foreshadowing and camaraderie he has, like, because he comes in, like you were saying, in the beginning, everybody's kind of this fear and concern about, oh my God, Orhan is with us, and then you find out from Tenzin that no, we like that guy, right?
He knew,
right? And he knew who he was.
He knew.
That was and that was like a nice. I would say, to answer your question earlier, that was probably like maybe the only time he had it easy.
I suppose so, yeah.
Finding out that the guy who's leading the pilgrims knows who he is and is cool with him and is even to an extent like okay with him being once the ruler of them all. Right?
Yeah. Remember, he's like, we don't really like the Wulangians. I mean, you ruled over us too, but you were more reasonable.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And I guess as a reader, the other part that kind of like, I was expecting the sword to play a part in it as sword and sorcery, sword and silk, and it doesn't. Right? The spoilers. The sword breaks. So that was a good plot point. That was a good point. Like, oh my God,
absolutely, like perfect, just sort of twist moment.
Yeah. Because like the jaded sword and sorcery reader is going to see the sword and think, oh yeah, Orhan's going to pick up the sword, and so smashing it's like, well, they're SOL.
Yep.
So
yeah, exactly, and the cleverness, because that's what I love about Orhan as well, as with Conan, as with so many other classic SNS protagonists. Yeah, he's a mighty warrior, and that's part of the fun. But he never really wins just by hitting a guy and being like, well, that worked out. It's his cunning. It gets his cunning or his empathy, some aspect of his character, not his skill with the sword. And so, exactly. He figures out in the story that, oh, wait a minute, the magic sword's nonsense. We don't actually need that.
I kept expecting like to hear the rings kind of clash back and forth as he's, slaying Gol Yarga.
Yeah.
Because there's rings on the swords. Which if anybody has watched any Shaw Brother movies, you know what the weapon is, right? It's an 8-ring Dow, I think it's called. And so I'm expecting to get all that excitement action going on. Then when the demon gets it and breaks it, I was like, oh shit, you son of a gun. So that was kind of cool, actually.
Oh, hello to Carl in the chat. Thanks for joining us, man. I know you're way over in the UK. It's quite late there. Meanwhile, Kevin, what would be one specific thing from the story that really stood out to you?
Actually, what I really like was when it flashes to Torma, I believe, when the demon is waking up laughing, and just the realization that the demon's gnawing on the headless body and recognizing it's his own body. That is like classic modern horror writing, like post Stephen King. Like, I don't know if anybody's ever done that kind of POV from somebody realizing they're dead beforehand, but from King and all the horror authors I read in the 80s and 90s, I was like, that's a nice jolt.
Yeah, no, totally a fun move. Like, he realized the steaming entrails being feasted on were his own. To me, that was a bit of the fun, like a bit of the weird we got in the story. The discombobulation it then gets reoriented along with the guy realizing what was going on, and super fun too, right? Like so much fun. Jay, what's a specific moment in the story that really grabbed you that you want to share?
Well, I feel like a couple of the big ones have already been taken.
All right.
But I would actually say that mine was also in that same window of realization there. And as the demons come about is sort of like where, like, I'm trying to think of a way to put it, but like the wording of a lot of those sections, like I made little flag notes in my copy because I was just like, the phrase "the cave vomited demons" just was like
I have that in my
absolutely
notes.
brilliant.
Yeah.
Just like talk about a one sentence 4-word horror story. Like
That was
Yeah.
I love that whole scene, and that's sort of like, I mean, that's where I one of my favorite things is just like any sort of like onslaught of creatures of the unknown is just gonna capture my attention.
Out of curiosity, did Dariel say he was using the lesser den pulp formula?
I mean, I can't imagine he wasn't, but whether he said
he
so or
really-
not is
That whole lesser den
definitely
keep
there.
escalating, things keep getting worse.
escalate, and then
Yeah.
slowly start to resolve some things, and that's basically what
Mhm.
happens here.
That's a good question,
Yeah.
Kevin. I have edited him several times now. And we've had long discussions on craft, and weirdly, Lester Dent has not come up, but I perfect. Makes sense to mention it. So, okay, well, folks, there's a question I'm going to have to throw at Dariel in the near future. How familiar are you with that? And for anyone listening who's like, what? Google Lester Dent, spelled exactly like it sounds, formula. He was a pulp writer who just was like, this is what I do, man. And he eventually published it and it got shared. And it's fun. I haven't played with it myself, but I feel like I got to do it once, at least once.
It's a key part of the Michael Moorcock 3-day novel method also.
Oh, I bet.
Oh.
No, literally he calls it out in the essay.
Yeah.
And so that's actually where I became familiar with it is through that, because I used the 3-day novel method to write books in more than 3 days, but less than a lot of other people do.
NaNoWriMo my ass. Try the 3-day Michael Moorcock.
Oh, yeah, no. So I don't do 3 days, but I can do one in 2 weeks.
Amphetamines not included.
Yeah, wow. Holy cow. Yeah. No, I mean, fair.
That's where I know it from, so I'm sure it's in the zeitgeist.
Yeah, so folks, I mean, check it out if you haven't already. The Lester Dent formula, and also just the Michael Moorcock 3-day novel. I know that's found online, and people will joke and be like, "Well, the secret is methamphetamines," and you know what? Maybe. I have the
microdosing.
Yeah, well, nothing micro about it, from what I understand. But, I mean, I don't know the man inside out. I got to work with him on one story, but I did have that pleasure. And at one point in our discussions, Mike, as he prefers to be called and has always done, but it sounds so overfamiliar when I say it, Mike said to me, he's like, "Oh, we were talking about meat pies," and he joked about how he's like, "Well, when I was younger, I used to write for money to buy drugs. Now I do it to buy meat pies," and it just made me laugh and feel like I had this like brief connection with like him in his 70s period writing those 3-day novels. Just like God, what a wild time in publishing. The amount of stories I've read about other authors who were like, start a novel on Monday, hand it in on Friday to get the money, and then go to the pub. British publishing in the 60s, 70s, and 80s was like something. But that's not
paper was cheaper back then.
That too, anyway. But anyways, back to the Demon of Tashi Zhang. One thing I really liked about it also is that Dariel's very good at writing grand battles. It's not like by chance that when him and I were discussing the novella for this project, Double-Edged Sword and Sorcery, I was like, maybe a siege. I just read Tim Willick's The Religion, and I had sieges in my mind, and so we talked about that for a bunch of reasons. But it was also because I read other stories of his, and I knew that he's very good at writing a grand battle and still like keeping you grounded in a single POV, keeping it personal, even though there's like huge forces moving around. This is not one of those stories with a grand battle. but there still is like kind of a mini siege that gets resolved fairly quickly. I mean, they get stormed almost immediately because, hey, we've only got 6,000 words here, right? That's my fault as the editor. But still, we had this battle with multiple forces and multiple switches and changes. One of my favorite things in the story is the monks are all like, yeah, we're ready, man. We're going to fight, these cavalrymen. If they burst in here, they better not have gunpowder. Spoiler, they do. We're going to fight them. And then one of them's like, hey, hang on. And they have an argument over who's going to take over because the abbot got arrows, shot in him by the cavalry. And I just love like that kind of turn. It happened within like a paragraph, and yet it didn't give me a sensation of whiplash because it was so believable and so like just naturally flowing out of the twists and turns of the story and the motivations of the characters. How did you, Jay, I'll throw it back to you. We'll go back around the circle the other way. How did you feel about the way like sort of the siege, the little mini siege that we had going on here went? Did it feel like a battle? Did it feel like just like a little fight scene that happened to have a lot of people involved? I don't know. How did that
I feel like he did a really good job of scaling it so that you don't really feel lost in it, which is one of those things that I think you and I in particular have gone back and forth about because of just sort of like the scale of a fight scene between something that's supposed to feel epic and something that's supposed to feel tight and natural and very sword and sorcery. And I feel like Dariel threads the needle there really well because you never feel like you're completely lost in the action. Like, pretty much while it's happening, like what is happening. I feel like it's very easy to visualize. And I'm trying to think of a way to like make like, I don't know. This is like now I have to bring my animated art feature out and be like, well, you see, I can see, but I think that would probably be like my primary takeaway for that.
Well, if you want to continue the filmic thing, you could almost say it's like, how certain action scenes get filmed in a way where they think that jerking the camera around constantly and cutting way too quickly so that you actually have trouble following what the hell's going on is intense and engaging, but
feel
actually
like
get
we were
lost.
having like rapid cut scenes. It felt very natural to me that the flow of the fight was continuous in a way that didn't feel jerky.
Yeah, like Dariel like lets a moment happen and finish and then moves on to the next one, but quickly, so you don't feel, it's like a shot.
You feel the resolution, but you don't feel the sudden movement of the camera.
How did you feel, Kevin, about this sort of like siege battle scene? I mean, I know one thing that people find contentious occasionally with SNS is where does the technology, stop kind of thing. So we have gunpowder, we have classic, medieval like Chinese gunpowder. We don't have guns. How did that all sit with you?
I'm fine with it. Again, I was thinking very much of like Kung Fu, especially that late 80s, early 90s, where his historical accuracy was not the primary focus of Hong Kong period action movies.
Yep.
Dariel does a really great job. Like I could hear in my head the thundering hoofbeats, the clang, like the jingling of the armor and chains. And it's easy for like people to sort of do a hero and talk about what a badass general they are and all this. And while you do get to build up a reputation for the introduction of Orhan, we actually see him as the tactician who's actively saves the monk's lives for what would have been an obvious slaughter if he hadn't had him build up the barricade. And finally, I just want to say, I love the phrase moon-bladed halberds. I knew exactly what he was talking about.
Yeah, and you're right. Like
again.
Like he absolutely demonstrates Orhan's skill through again his cleverness and his tactician's mind, and yet never makes it seem like it's easy because even when he's triumphing on one front, something else is happening. One line I made a note of here was, Dariel. Sorry, pardon me. What did you put here? Oh no, I lost my note. Sorry, just a sec. Oh god. It was like whatever he said. It's under my notes, but it was something to the effect of like, and Orhan was in his element playing his favorite game, and he's laughing, but meanwhile, somewhere else, something else was laughing, and it's like the demons are bubbling up, kind of thing. So like we get to the end of a sentence, not even to be like he's kicking ass, but then it's like, well, there's more problems. So again, it's not getting easy for him. How about you, Kirk? How did you feel about the action at large and the sort of the military picture action?
To agree, I agree with both Kevin and Jay about the kind of the like using a wide lens on the scene and having them all just the chaos and the back and forth flow of the action demonstrating how well the monks are able to hold off due to Orhan's tactical know-how.
Yeah.
And the ferocity. There's a line in there where I love how he gives them credit. He gives the Wulong soldiers their credit for first traveling for so long in through the terrain, and then scaling the wall to attack these guys. And like, I got to give them credit for their ferocity and their loyalty and their martial skill. And I'm like, yeah, this is awesome. This is awesome. And the part about the fireworks thing did not put me out, because I doing a little bit of reading on Chinese history and Asian history and a little bit, and knowing that they had fireworks and they had gunpowder. So it was kind of not a surprise in terms of anachronism, but just a surprise, like, oh, good, they're using that which what they should be using. Right?
Yeah.
Not surprised at all.
It's kind of neat because like Dariel does write in a secondary world, but he will tell you himself that it is heavily modeled off of like a rough period of when Genghis Khan was charging around. And so therefore, gunpowder absolutely was a thing.
Which personally I actually really enjoy when I'm able to, at least in my imagination, pinpoint and get a better understanding of the set, the world, where they are, how they dress. Because we don't really go into a long details on dress and culture and stuff, but little tidbits here and there about what you're wearing, and then you use you use the nomenclature of that thing in question, and I get an idea of where and what and how. I get better, like the spade, like the Mooncrest staff that the monks were using. Or automatically I knew, this is the Shaolin monks fighting with led by a Mongol general against the Song dynasty soldiers, and that was it. Right, so that was fantastic to me, and to add with the demons sprouting out of the cracks in the terrain and growing larger as they start feeding on whoever the hapless victim is at that time.
And changing the mood, right? Like I thought that was cool. So is bringing in effortlessly without a bunch of exposition, just this idea that like we've seen elsewhere, but still of demons being emotional creatures, feeding emotion. And Orhan, before he even sees a demon, is like, hang on, I'm starting to like hit dudes just to maim them, and I'm getting kind of bloodthirsty. What's up with that? And then it's like, oh, these like big bloodthirsty demons are boiling up and they're changing, that on top of everything else. And again, like Dariel is just so damn efficient. He got that in with like a sentence, and I immediately was there. I knew, and enhanced the atmosphere of what I was enjoying. Okay, so because we're trying to cover 2 stories tonight and not take 2 hours to do it, we're going to move on quickly. But before we do, we should all get a chance, I think, for a closing thought on this. And one thing I'm going to bring in is that I love the way that the opening didn't feel like it was telling me the ending, but the ending told me that the opening fed into it. And one of those little ways that I really liked was the fact that, Orhan, listeners, sorry, I should mention this at the top. For those who are really unfamiliar and have just dropped in, out of left field on tonight, Orhan is essentially meant to be like, what if Genghis Khan was deposed by his brother of history and then was hunted by him and just basically was on the run ever since, trying to figure out how to reclaim his throne, get revenge on his brother, and survive various circumstances along the way. So Orhan is always, to some degree or another, pursued. And I thought that was really cool in this story was that we open and very soon find out that he's actually just been in jail for 2 years. And we find out why later in the story with the classic civilization barbarism thing coming up, where it's just like, he's like, I'm a barbarian, but I like the nice things that civilization offers. And that's how I got caught, because I was, God damn it.
Dumplings.
Don't play it.
So like that's fun, He's like, gold women spas. What do you want from me? And so it's fun to be like, oh, he's in jail for 2 years. Okay, now he's like briefly out, but he's being pursued. He's being tracked, and then we get to just about the end, basically the end, and he's the demons have been dealt with, but the Wulongian cavalry are there. They've got reinforcements. And he's like, man, I don't want to get these monks slaughtered because, he's in it for himself ultimately, but he does have a heroic side to him. He does take responsibility for his actions. He's like, I'm not going to sacrifice these monks for me. So fine, here's my hands, put me in chains again. I guess I'm going back to jail. And I, of course, love that he did not end up going back to jail.
Yeah.
But still, it was this thing of this like the kind of book ending of, oh yeah, right, jail, out of jail, back to jail. Okay, well that was rough, you know. So yeah, I thought, again, like I said earlier, I just really felt like when I was trying to pry the story open to discuss it for tonight, like I was trying to take a perfectly well assembled piece of furniture, and like I was almost having trouble pulling it apart in a way because there was just no air in the gaps, you know, but so to speak, where it was assembled, and that was one of those things that made me feel that way. The Dariel had this thing so, and he's not a super duper outliner. That's the other thing too. My instinct would be to think, oh, he outlined this thing like Lego bricks, real careful. But like, nope. He does do some preliminary work with his research, but then he kind of pants on the back end. Anyway, y'all can hear Dariel talking about that in one of the many interviews he's done to promote the book. We have links to those in our updates. So, Jay, any final comments, thoughts, feelings, whatever about the story?
I mean, if we're talking about the ending, I really just liked the way that it resolved with just enough detail that you have a good idea what's coming next, but it's not spelled out for you. And it leaves a lot of room for you to imagine the next adventure, which is a thing that is always very, very keen for me personally, especially in Sword and Sorcery, where one of the happily ever after conditionals is there's more adventures.
Yep. Yeah, no, I remember you and I were talking about that with Beating Hearts Battle Axes. We're like, what is a romantic ending for a Sword and Sorcery protagonist?
Yeah.
Wow.
What's the happily ever after? The happily ever after is that it goes on.
Yeah. More treasure to plunder, more places to travel. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, no, you absolutely get that sense from Dariel. It's fun too because he has a chronology
Right.
beforehand, but you do not have to read it in that order. He just likes to try and keep it all, in order in his own head so he doesn't get stories tripping over each other.
Right.
But yeah. Kevin, any final thoughts you want to share with us before we move on to Goatskin?
Just as you said at the beginning, this is just a really well-oiled machine of an adventure story, and that is something Dariel's really good at, and really people should check out to see how it's done.
Yeah, it's one of those things that looks easy because it isn't. Yeah.
Right.
Kirk, how about you, man? Any final thoughts?
Same with Kevin. I'm Jay. I'm excited to see what happens next. I mean, just real quick, I was kind of happy that I think his name is Zuchi. He was like, he quit.
Yeah.
Right. The border guy was the border officer was like, you know what? I've seen a lot of shit already, and I'm good. Time to retire.
I'm gonna become a monk.
Yeah.
I think me and a lot of the boys are gonna become monks.
Right. That's it feels like, you know what? I at that point I was like, you know what? I'm with him. I'm just Orhan, good luck what you're doing. We'll be a monk.
And that's how Orhan gets his freedom, right? Like I love it. He gets his freedom because these guys are horrified.
Right. That's
I got eating somebody's entrails today. Right. I think I'm just gonna chill on the mountain.
Right. I feel like that's a great ending. Like your secondary characters also have like a sense of closure that isn't so dour.
Mm-hmm.
Right. That there's I finished reading and I was like, yeah, that was good. Like a well done meal.
And it's not dour, and we've had our action, we've had our emotion, we've had definitely some gentle humor. Like I say, them turning into monks was hilarious in my opinion. But then we have that final beat where the main monk who had that power within him, as it turned out, not within the sword, it becomes a statue, and his hand closes around the sword, which has
the sword.
We knew had been stolen at the beginning, and now it's been returned. Right. And that's
in
the
a stance.
final image. Yeah,
in a stance, not even as in meditation, but in a martial arts stance. That was.
And how cinematic, to come back to what we were saying. I could practically see the camera like zooming in, and the fingers just around the sword handle. So
what's the name of the new book he has coming out? What's the name of that?
So his novella that is one half of the Double-Edged Sword and Sorcery is The Walls of Shira Yulun.
Excited to see that. Yeah, excited.
No, it was both stories. These authors, they were very excited to do this project, and boy howdy did they put their backs into it. And Dariel, no exception to that statement. It was interesting because he had more room, right? So it was like the rhythm was a little different, but it was 100% Dariel all the way through. Like you'll see, and you'll see too. You pledge to this crowdfunding. Sorry, folks.
Yeah.
Like I genuinely don't feel ashamed about, because whatever, right? I'm here to push my author's work. I love them and I love what they wrote, but it's still hard not to kind of fall into a self-mocking, I don't know, use Carl Sagan voice, whatever. Casey Kasem always comes to mind. No shame on him. I just heard him a lot growing up.
Well, you're
All right,
better
so-
than Benson and Hedges, so yeah.
Ah.
You're way better than Benson and Hedges, so I'd say go ahead, do it, man, do it.
Yeah, why not? Why not?
Right. You're doing
All
more
right.
good than they are.
So, yeah, I mean, could be. God, what's the American Arms Company that was tied to some
Oh,
author? Anyway,
Lockheed?
whatever. Let's
Oh,
not get
God.
down a cul-de-sac. Point is. So I think we're done discussing the demons of Tashi Zhang, which again, folks, if you want to read it, that's in New Age Sword and Sorcery issue 2. Yeah, why don't we go on to New Age Sword and Sorcery issue 1 with Sister Chaos by Bryn Hammond. Now, part of the fun of the double is that Bryn and Dariel both write stories that are set more or less in, Mongol times and settings. Dariel is a secondary fantasy world, but heavily modeled through his research. And with Bryn, it is a sort of more fantastical version of our world. It is absolutely taking place in settings, and so any ethnic groups or cities or wherever that she refers to, like you can kind of dig up those yourself, and that makes sense because she is a scholar of those times, has had multiple publications in the nonfiction realm about it. So it's very fun to think that she brings that to bear in her work. And yeah, with that similarity, both of them have very distinct voices. We discussed Dariel's, we'll now discuss Bryn's, and I hope you'll enjoy the contrast and the complement of those two voices. I know I certainly have many times. So before I say anything, I realize what I should have done for Dariel's. We kind of muddled our way through it, and I think people could figure out the story. Why don't I just give like a 2 sentence on this one? So Sister Chaos is about Goatskin the Nomad and her bandit lover, Sister Chaos, which is one of many aliases. It's established in the story. Both of them have quite a few going on, but for simplicity's sake, we'll go with Goatskin and Sister Chaos for our discussion. And yeah, Sister Chaos has quite recently killed a scholar, and so they're on the run. But very early in their being on the run, they're kind of having a good time, and then whoops, Sister Chaos gets kind of zapped with a curse by a strange bulbous-nosed antelope, and then they're off to the races to try and figure out what the hell was with the antelope. How do we cure this curse? Sister Chaos's arm, where she has her hair flower tattoo that's very important to her, is like bubbling and black and turning worse and gnarly, and that's no good. So the story is all about them trying to solve the mystery of like what the hell just happened. How do we get rid of this curse? What do we do? So that's the gist of the story. So, Jay, I'll start with you. What is sort of a broad initial reaction that you had to rereading the story?
I've read this story several times because I think this was one of the ones you actually sent me back when you were pitching me on, like, wouldn't it be interesting if we did a special issue?
That's true, because Bryn did wind up in the anthology beating hearts and battle axes with a story with these characters, because I so enjoyed the bit of romance we got in the story. I was like, give me more. Yes. So we got to put them in beating hearts. So yeah.
Yes, and that was and so I have a lot of fondness for these characters just because of that. And I think that trying to think, like, as far as like a big picture goes, I mean, it's such an intriguing story. The way in which she uses the landscape as part of the storytelling devices is just like, I am in awe of that at all times. Like, the steps are really like a character in her stories, and that's one of the things that I really like in this particular one. I'm trying to think of a good way to, I don't know. I feel like that's the easiest way I can sum up my feelings on that.
Yeah, no, fair. No, setting is very key to hers. I mean, with Dariel, it's kind of like it heightens the drama. The mountains were up in the isolated space. With Bryn here in this tale, it's kind of a poetic thing. It gives you a sense of grandeur. Yes. It does something I love to see in Sword and Sorcery, which is, I forget who I'm stealing this phrase from. It might have been Brian Murphy, re-wondering the world. Whether it's through having magic, crazy crap, crystals or whatever, or just beautifully evocative descriptions of more natural settings as we have in this one. It makes you see the world as a big and wondrous place. And I think that's part of the magic of the genre.
Absolutely.
Yeah, no, Bryn totally nails that. How about you, Kevin? What's a general observation from returning to the story?
Well, the major thing is, if Dariel is very much comes from like the Rory Howard school of Sword and Sorcery, I think for Bryn, most specifically to her, is Tanith Lee, but through Tanith Lee, I can follow it all the way back to Clark Ashton Smith, of just that more ornate, much more emphasis on this really dense atmosphere.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would say if Dariel's is like airtight, stock car racer or whatever the hell I was babbling about earlier, then Bryn is like this beautifully brocaded, like gothic home with just so many features everywhere you look. Yeah. How about you, Kirk? Any sort of initial general reactions?
Yeah, I got the impression of Jing Long's The Legend of the Condor Warriors, and A Hero Was Born. That's the kind of, because it's very different from Dariel's like tone in terms of, for me, Dariel is like an action movie. This one is a different kind of action movie where there's more about the emotions and the connection of the characters with each other and how they respond and see each other.
Yes.
And which was a beautiful thing actually to experience at this point. Because I'm usually reading like these very masculine action driven tales, but this one was very like, hey, this is kind of like, we're on our way back to home after I did this thing and we're sneaking in. The peril is there, but the peril seems secondary to the journey.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, it's just kind of beautiful the way she wrote it. The oh my God, the emotion at the end, the conclusion of it all just made me want to kind of cry a little bit. In joy, because of what happens. Like they have a child together.
sort of.
Yeah, for all intents and purposes, they have a child together. It's not something I there was love there.
Yeah.
There was funny you mentioned that because I will joke, I'll put it in somewhat sillier terms and be like, I kind of occasionally comment on how strange I find that Sword and Sorcery, particularly for its cover art from the 70s, is known for in some ways being very sexualized. You have a lot of people just wearing very little clothing, oiled bodybuilder bodies with whatever, and so on and so forth. And yet, due to editorial restraints and other things going on, during the second wave of SMS, simultaneously oddly very chaste. A lot of like totally fading to black if characters even do have sex. And so I gotta say, I kind of as an editor was like, oh, this is kind of like a pleasing thing where the characters have sex, and it's not that it gets like graphic with the details, but that they do it, and then it's this expression of connection early on, and just little details like I think it was Duzmat, or maybe it was the real name of Goatskin, but it was one of them that Sister Chaos, I think, actually had a post-orgasmic gale of laughter after the usual, right? Like these characters know each other a while. So
I noted that one.
After the usual post-orgasm gale of laughter. Then all of a sudden the camel makes a noise and they get distracted and there's the antelope and we're off to the races. Right?
Real talk. You'll never see that read in the kind of stories that we're used to. I guess the Sword and Sorcery.
I have not encountered it much else. No,
and that is a good thing. Post-orgasmic gale of laughter. That's a special kind of laugh.
It's such a specific thing, and it's like you know.
Right. Right.
Right. Something specific. Something personal.
All couplings, all genders understand that.
It's universal, but it's specific, and it's something you can relate to. And even if you're younger, maybe can't, or you're ace and you can't, it's still kind of like, okay, well, this gives me an idea of these two and how they relate.
The other thing about it that is like interesting is that it is beautiful in a sense. Like a lot of times one of the things that people try to do is the comic pullback, but that's more of the this is more of the interpersonal, like it's just like a moment of great beauty. And so I thought that was like fascinating. And it's again another thing that's executed in a single line, and then you're on to another thing. But it's there, and it does so much work.
It does so much. It does so much, and I love it because sometimes I feel funny, especially as like a straight guy, being like, "I want more sex in my SNS." But this is kind of what I mean when I'm talking about it.
It's a character moment. It's a very deep character moment.
It's a character moment. It makes me like these characters more. It gets me more into them. It tells me about them. And it just, I don't know, man, it's fun. So like that's something like the first draft I read, I like put a big circle around it and was like, keep this bit. We got to keep.
there was a discussion on the Whetstone server, not specifically about the story, but I recall when talking, the subject came up about including sex and sword and sorcery, and somebody was pointing out you can have a burly mercenary that we've all seen before, but depending on, is he a tender lover? Is he
Yeah.
paying somebody to
Right.
humiliate him? Like
Right.
all that casts different sides of that helps Bill's character in its own way. And
Yes.
this really loving relationship between the two of them, the playfulness, that as much tells us what we need to know about Goatskin and Sister Chaos.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, that was fun. The other thing that I always feel Bryn brings to the table is that, she shows that there are multiple ways of tackling the theme of sword and sorcery, civilization and barbarism, right? I mean, here we have this nomad and this bandit, and they are, to those who consider themselves civilized, certainly the barbarians. They live in the margins in the story to find answers for their mystery. They go further into the margins, into an illegal encampment of people who are not really considered people by the dominant culture. Gee, is that still relevant? I don't know. And and there's all kinds of
Yeah.
lines about not only people and borders and lands, which are all wonderful and relevant, but the thing I want to focus on for a moment before I kick the ball over to someone else. On page 3, I really like the commentary about like having killed a scholar specifically, right? Like who Sister Chaos killed matters, not just because of like some funny moments it facilitates later when they're contemplating the antelope and is it possessed by the ghost of the person she killed? It had a big nose. The scholar had a big nose. There's a bit of fun there, right? But also it's this kind of thing of Sister Chaos being like, yeah, well, you know what? Us barbarians, we have culture too. We just don't record it or pass it along the same way. It's not respected, and literally the line, and Bryn and I talked about this a bit, and ultimately I was like, okay, you know what, Bryn, you're right, keep it. Literally, Sister Chaos at one point just says, fuck the classics, which is, I think, I enjoy the confrontational nature of that statement. I think after a bit of mulling over, I was like, okay, yeah, let's have an F-bomb. I'm fine with cursing in general, but I was like, this is match the period language feel. I don't know. Fuck it, whatever. But also, there you go. Like it's civilization versus barbarism, but in like something, it doesn't have to do with the decadence of like money and clothing, as I find it tends to be framed. Like civilized people are all very soft and covered in gold and silk, and the barbarians are all very hard and they barely wear anything. This was kind of a different axis along which to explore that classic sword and sorcery theme, and kind of a fun one when the author has done a lot of like nonfiction and like floated past academia. You got to feel like that's informed by the author's experiences at some level. So yeah, I thought that was really, really cool. Jay, what's maybe something else more particular to the story that you wanted to highlight?
Oh, I gotta look for some of my.
Give you some time to think. We can
You
go
know what
around
I
the
was
table
going
the
to
other
say
way.
too. One of the things that I love that really runs through all of Bryn's stuff is the poetry. Honestly, it's just that it's so natural to these characters that's how they convey information. That's how they keep things that are important and valuable to them, and that it feels very natural to me, like and in a way that we think of like the old times, the bards did but she just does it without a lot of like circumstance around it. It's just natural.
Yeah, no, yes, once in a while, I have no problem with poetry and stories. I have no, snobbery, whatever reflex kicking in when I see that, but it can be integrated better or worse. And as you say, Bryn integrates it quite well. It feels very natural.
Yeah,
Kevin,
it's just part of her storytelling.
Yeah. Is there anything specific you would like to highlight that you enjoyed in the story, or just feel it illustrates a cool technique or something?
I love the fact that she put in like, this is obviously her knowledge that she's imparting upon us about the culture. But I've seen usually this information, a bad author or an author making a mistake will do this as an info dump.
Yeah.
Where it's not as obvious now, I think, in the internet days where people can look it up. But I'm thinking very much of a certain author I remember reading where they were doing police procedurals. And yeah, it would be like 3 pages of technical jargon and then a few lines of dialogue. Here everything was very interconnected, that you were feeling like you were getting an education lesson, but not in a way that she was lecturing us about what this was like.
Yeah, she
brings you in.
interweaves. Yeah, it's interwoven with the action and the dialogue, and never just the dialogue just sit still for like 10 hours to like give you a lecture. Yeah, and I mean it's not. Oh boy, even more recent books. I won't be a mean and name names. But it's a big enough author he could take the hit. I was reading a space story a few years ago, and it just killed me when it like a lot of action was happening. It was very wild, and I was like, okay, oh boy, and then it just stopped for like a 2-page description of how a ship turned left using extremely like accurate physics. And I just by the end of that 2-page description, I was like, hey, back to the action. And I was like, I don't give a shit.
What are we doing
they can
here?
blow up. I don't care. Yeah. I never get that feeling with Bryn. And I always get the feeling of like I'm absorbing something interesting while I'm passing through her work. No, absolutely, Kevin, I agree. Certainly as I say in this, there was elements of just like ideas of different cultures and how like the different, again, the barbarism versus civilization thing, I felt it was enriched by some of the history that we learned through this. How about you, Kirk? Was there anything, you mentioned a few things earlier on, but is there anything else specific you'd love to highlight?
Well, two things interesting that when we talked about the barbarism and civilization and how Sister Chaos has like this thing against the scholars and how the scholars are seen and civilized, and pretty much they're the medallion of civilization, right? The gold standard to have these scholars. But then she's kind of funny when it comes to tent people and nomads, right? That she starts a argument with Goatskin about entering a tent, to get aid, to food, shelter in this harsh environment, which you need, and her kind of like, I don't want to do this, to precious nomad, and that struck me as like, oh, so you don't just like, so you're that person in the middle. You don't like civilization, but you consider
hierarchy.
Barbarians are still lower than right?
Well, there's barbarians and there's barbarians. You know what I mean? You know what I mean? Like,
right. Because she's, you know what I mean? So, and she still wears like really nice boots that she had to take off with the Griffin scale. So she has, for lack of a better term, she's like the dudes in my neighborhood where, might not like the authority figures of civilization, but but them Nikes and Timbers do look nice on my feet. Right?
Well, yeah,
and I'm not going back, and I'm not going down south, right? And I'm not going down south where the Hucks live.
Yeah.
But I don't like, but you know what I mean? That dichotomy there is what I found really interesting about it. And I love the poetry that she adds into the story, that it felt like a plot point, like a marker for what's to come, and to understanding who these characters are. Like the one that really caught me was, and I'm gonna have to find a way to put this someplace here, Bryn. This is awesome. I am led from a boast to another boast, from a feat to another feat, and then explaining that to Sister Chaos, and for Sister Chaos to actually show it.
Yep.
Yeah.
Like they literally get in trouble with the spirit because of her.
Yep.
And because she makes a boast, because she says, "Nope, I'm gonna do this."
Mm-hmm.
And I'm gonna go. That was
I'm
so
gonna eat that antelope.
Right. I'm gonna eat the antelope. Yeah. I ain't gonna let that antelope, chase us. I mean, I'm gonna go chase it.
Yeah,
you know
God, there's too many moving parts in this story for me to cover them all in this discussion. But thank you for highlighting that, Kirk, because that slipped my mind, and I can't believe it did. Because one of the things I love so much about this early on, such an SNS protagonist thing to say, right? About how, like, it's good that everybody hears my legend, knows I'm great, that has advantages, but also it kind of one-upping myself and paying attention, you know.
But Goatskin might be the barbarian, but Sister Chaos is more like Conan.
Right. And then we segue from that very discussion, talking about, to talk about how like Goatskins, we contrast their outfits, right? Goatskin was a more humble goat. She's called that because she wears goat skins, right? Everything she's wearing is kind of brown in your mind and stitched together. And Sister Chaos is not wearing like fancy clothing, but she's wearing like a mockery, an intentional mockery of fancy clothing. We get into with the names, right? How one of her nicknames is kind of like a false king nickname, mocking the actual king's titles. And she's wearing this jacket that you can imagine has like fake medals and epaulets and stuff on it, as well as dirt from the road. And both of them are like, well, it would make sense for us to lose our outfits so people couldn't find us as easily. But hell with that, we're going to keep our outfits, we're going to keep our identity. But also we're going to take our clothes off because now we're going to fuck. So when we get to that part that we all,
which is awesome.
And like so much of that, like look how much just happened in my description, which does not do the prose justice, folks, obviously. And that's just like a bit of page 1 and 2.
Just the name, King of Scarlet Jacket.
Yes.
So
it's very evocative. It instantly tells you so much about her.
Yes. I just love the little detail of the buttons on the coat being made of quartz. I never even considered that before, and I'm like, oh wow.
Yeah.
And now I don't know if this was a coincidence. Before we lose the quartz, and to kind of grab onto another piece of story that I love, folks, you might hear us saying like, well, Dariel's got the action and Bryn's got the big ideas. And you might think, well, does that mean Bryn doesn't have, is it all like boy stuff or whatever? One reason I love Bryn's story is because it proves the lie of having to choose between high or low or whatever. And so, we have these like big themes. We have these big thick character moments. We have, what I just described, all the jacket, the clothing, and the lovemaking, But we also got the weird for sure. We have one of the ways we have the weird is that the person who ends up helping them figure out their mystery is a shaman they meet near the end through, that tent community we mentioned. And this shaman, for reasons I won't go into too much detail on because we're getting a little long on time, has organs that are made of quartz. And he does open his skin like tent flaps to show them. And the moonlight, I don't have the line in front of me unfortunately, but the moonlight.
Tell him how they do it. Tell him how he opens up his chest. Go ahead, tell him. That was
Sister Chaos kind of threatens him, right? And then he's like, all right, well, you know what, check this out. Opens up his torso and the starlight glints through his organs again. Bryn does it better than me. And he just explains like how that's kind of like his source of his power, but also a cost he had to pay, and how like, his flesh will shrivel and grow old, but the organs keep going until there's a replacement for him. And he even has that little line where he's like, the patriarchs like to tell you that age is a great thing, but I got to tell you, man, I'd rather be 20. Like just like, little bits of humor kind of woven into this like weird and magnificent, moments happening. And we have action, we have the fun and action of like sort of the sex scene going straight into like chasing the antelope to Zap curse, but we also have things like flashbacks to terrible battles in palaces that we get the significance of later. Again, I'm trying not to give away literally everything. And if you just want to hit someone with something kind of gonzo and action and weird all together at once, for heaven's sakes, it makes sense in context, folks. Goatskin in a forest has to fight a gigantic cloven-hoofed human leg that's kind of a meaty skeleton leg. What? If you just said to someone, hey, I read the story where somebody fights like a big skeleton leg, that would not prepare you for this story, but it would be a fun doorway into it. And so it comes back to what I was saying about how like, this is you can tell my voice, I'm getting excited just talking about it around the houses here, but it's like I whenever people say, I have to make fun of good old Lynn Carter, an editor, folks from the 70s, if you don't know, who had an opening to one of his collections of Conan that he was like, I just don't worry, there's no big ideas in this story. You won't have to think about any of the major issues of the day, like Spiro Agnew and Norwegian pornography.
Or a ripping good yarn, free of political.
He's a Norwegian.
I'm not kidding, Conan the Buccaneer. Read the opening if you got it.
It is literally that dorky.
Yeah. You can't make it up nonsense. No, Norwegian pornography, Spiro Agnew at the IRS, I think. I don't have it in front of me, alas, but it's fantastic.
That's an awesome word salad. I love that.
Oh yeah. And I mean, whether or not he was playing a character to an imagined audience, I don't know. That's another discussion for another day.
Right.
But that's just like a fun, extreme example of something we all encounter all the time, specifically in SNS. People who think you have to choose between entertainment, quote unquote, and like big ideas and themes and real thickening the soup kind of thing. And like both these authors, I think, but I'm going to highlight Bryn because that's obviously who we're talking about right now. They prove the lie. You can have it all, and you can read through it. And on any given reading, you can enjoy focusing on the big fucked up skeleton leg and the sex scene and the whatnot, or you can reread it and still actually be reading those exact scenes I just cited, but be looking at them differently. Because the sex scene has that depth that we described. The fight scene with the big skeleton leg, especially on the second reading, you'll be like, oh, hang on, there's a little more going on here, even though it is super cool and has some good art, if I dare say so. Again, by Dan Remble. So yeah, like that to me is just something I love that this story demonstrates about Bryn and what she can do, and her and I talked about this a lot with her writing Waste Flowers, because with that extra room, right, she was like, oh, I could get some more history, some more big ideas, and I was like, yeah, well, let's not forget like action. Let's put it all together, make it, and I mean, I just gave some notes. I mean, I'm not taking any credit for the beautiful execution of the ideas and taking on a little bit of input from me that Bryn did in Waste Flower. But I'm telling you, if you like Sister Chaos, the story period, but also Sister Chaos and Goatskin's relationship in this, you're going to see that evolve and do some interesting things with Waste Flowers. If you like seeing weird, wild, crazy spirits and stuff, you're going to see that too. Kirk, you raise your hand there. What's up, bud?
Poetry? Will there be some poetry in that? Because that's a
Well,
strong thing. That's a strong thing. It's beautiful. It's beautiful. I'm just saying.
Yeah, no. There's poetry, there's poetic turns of phrase. Yeah, and like, I've been babbling for a minute, so you know what I'm going to do? It's 8:07, so why don't we do some closing thoughts? I'm going to keep going around the table in the same order, so sorry, Jay, I'm going to go to you first. Is there anything we've missed? Anything that you even just want to like double underline that you liked a lot? Anything at all? Closing thoughts on Sister Chaos from you?
I feel like yet again, I'm going to point out that the ending of the story just wraps everything up so nicely. I really love the way that, again, and it's another one with a passage of poetry that's specifically in telling the story in a way that's not quite how it happened, but very, very eloquently, and just dovetailing back to all of the things that were going on at the beginning of the story in a way that I just think is really unique.
Right. Yeah, the talk at the beginning of the various ways that legends are told of each of them, and how Sister Chaos gets sort of more dramatic tellings, and Goatskin gets mentioned as a funny aside in little like Punch and Judy type plays. Yeah,
exactly.
And then we get that iteration of what we just read in the back end, as you say. Yeah. No, good call. I forgot about that. How about you, Kevin? Any final thoughts you want to share on the story?
In comparison, like I made to mention that Dariel's story, I could hear the drums and the big brass. Here, I could definitely hear a lot more emotional string sections that really serves as a counterpoint to the action.
That's solid.
Yeah, no, I'm with you on that. It's funny you should say that, but speaking of spoilers, I'm not going to mention anything about possibly our final live stream. Kirk, how about you, man? What's it seems like the story really gripped you. Is there anything else you want to bring up that we have not covered?
If possible, I'd like to read the first line from Sister Chaos.
Read the first two lines. Go for it.
Well, just that beginning is like, disemboweled by a spear called Pear and Flower. This woman enthralls our reign of peace and harmony, Sister Chaos.
Yeah.
Just read that, yo. That right there. Just read it. Just read the story. That's right there.
Right in.
That put me right in.
Yeah.
That put me right in. So I'm like, yeah.
And speaking of pushing things forward and doing new things while still absolutely showing love for the classics, Robert E. Howard did that a few times, just a few of his stories had some really cool poetry, opening and closing, or whatever. So yeah, there you go. So folks, I hope you've enjoyed hearing us discuss these two short stories. If you haven't already, I hope it inspires you to pick up the book, which is a pairing of the same authors, same characters, same settings, but in longer novella format, which was a new one for both of them. Neither of them had written, I think one of Dariel's stories just about hit the cusp of novella length before, but certainly that was like maybe 17,000 words or something. So yeah, these are the longest Goatskin and Orhan, the Snow Leopard stories ever written. And they are paired with beautiful cover art, which you've seen us use wildly all over the campaign page and so on. But also each story will have one full page black and white by a completely different artist interior illustration. I'm a big believer. I love when I read books as a kid, especially, where you'd have that beautiful cover art and you go in and there's a bit of the front matter, but then you get like a gateway. I always love it if the illustration looked like the character's looking at you while kind of pointing backwards, like deeper into the book, kind of thing. Maybe I'm just too literal, but I'm almost a literal gateway. Like, we're going in, we're about to enter the story. So we'll see what that art winds up being like, because we're not going to commission that till after the crowdfund succeeds? ? Please help us. But yeah, we're doing pretty good. I think we'll do it. Sorry, publisher.
I just took a look and
Sorry, folks. As a publisher, you can never
The
not
lag
have
report.
nerves. And we got another pledge that was hearty, but looks of it, so that's good. All right, thank you, Kevin, for drawing my attention. Anyway, yes, so I'll look at that in a minute. Pardon me, folks. When you're the publisher and you're behind one of these crowdfunds, it's kind of like when you're watching the news and you have like on cable and you have like the news ticker along the bottom of just like facts going along constantly. Like I just have that in my brain perpetually about every
The
little
breaking
aspect of
news
the
banner.
crowdfund. And it's easy for me to get distracted from what I'm saying in the foreground. And like, oh wait, what's in the news ticker? And people are like, "Oh, right, didn't ask about the news ticker. Do you want a glass of water?" So yeah, pardon me. But anyway, as I was saying, yes, we will have those sort of gateway art pieces on the interior of either side of the book. And you know what? If we really, get some jet fuel in this thing, I hope to enhance the book with spray color edges, another classic paperback thing that we're getting there. We're getting there. And then Sejan Rai, who I want to work with this man. So, for my sake, get us to that second stretch goal, because that will enhance the book with a 2-page full color art spread dead center as a nice way of making sure you don't go whoops and accidentally upside down read the ending of the other novella after you finish the first one, whichever one you start with. Sajan's style is beyond description. I would say you can see samples of it on the campaign page, so go check it out there or look him up on Instagram. The man has style. His most recent piece was the cover of the soundtrack album for the film Monkey Man, that kind of John Wick by way of India film that I need to see. That looks good. But that's a discussion for off mic. So I'm just going to close by saying again, please, if you haven't already considered pledging, if you have, thank you so much. Same thing goes for telling your friends, telling your enemies, telling your frenemies, friends and lovers. I don't care, man. Tell them all. After that post-orgasmic gale of laughter, mention the book. And what? They had their usual crowdfund promotion after post-orgasmic crowdfund promotion. And thank you so much to our panelists, obviously Jay Wolf, Kevin Beckett, Kirk Johnson, all doing their own great stuff. Look them up, check them out online. They're all very Googleable. And let those who are not seen on the screen go unremarked upon. I could not possibly do this on my own. Thank you so much to Nathaniel Webb for doing layout and design on our projects, to Valerie Valdez for doing our proofreading, and to Lee, who is our bold and beautiful social media coordinator, who has produced this and other live streams so that I can focus on running my damn mouth. So thank you to all of you. And good night.
Night.
Good night.
Good night.